This video is sponsored by Manscaped.com. This is the single best arc of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure I've ever seen, by far. Before I jump into this review, let it be known that prior to picking up the material for the purposes of this review, I had never really heard anything or seen anything about JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Diamond is Unbreakable. Well, okay, that's not exactly true. I did know the name, mostly because years back when I said I didn't like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, everyone and their grandmother aggressively insisted I check out this particular part because, and I quote, "Dude, Diamond is Unbreakable is the sort of JoJo story people who don't like the first few like." Which is a really weird thing to say and an even weirder way to sell you on a particular story, but it did pique my curiosity. Fast forward 3 or 4 years later and here I am now having completed Phantom Blood, Battle Tendency, and Stardust Crusaders, all of which I expected to dislike on the outset, but instead ended up loving for vastly different reasons. Which brings me to today, where I stare down the barrel of easily one of JoJo's most popular parts. It's unlike anything that's come before it, and it's exactly what I love in a good story. I'm totally not Mark, and these are my first impressions of, thoughts on, and review for the creepy, mysterious, and tension-filled 4th outing by Araki. This is JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Diamond is Unbreakable. Once again, because Araki loves to write ridiculously long stories, I'm going to have to split this one into 2 parts. The manga, you see, it's 174 chapters. That's almost twice as long as One Piece's longest arc, so even I'm not that crazy. With that said, I found the perfect place to stop in this video, and I'll be covering the second half as well as its climax next week. But enough about that. This week, I had to read 5 thick boys to discuss the first half. And you know what? This is by far the weirdest part of JoJo I've read, and definitely the weirdest manga I've opened. Not just because of what the story contains, but because of what the volume did. In volume 5 of Diamond is Unbreakable, I got free bonsai seeds? To clear this up, I didn't order any bonsai seeds with my Diamond is Unbreakable set. This is off to a bizarre start, but you better believe I'm planting these bonsai trees once I finish Diamond is Unbreakable. What should I name the tree? Comment something down below. Anyways, this story, while I think it's fundamentally different in its approach when compared with Stardust Crusaders, Battle Tendency, and even Phantom Blood, it's taken elements from each of them and spliced them together with its very own secret sauce to create something entirely new. For instance, there's a clear episodic feeling to this story, at least early on, in them encountering stands. However, the frequency with which they encounter these new stands has decreased significantly since Stardust Crusaders, and the length of these encounters feel much longer. And what's more is, much like Battle Tendency, there's a stronger connection to a goal and progressive serialized format than what Stardust Crusaders offered. Heck, even the small enclosed settings that this arc marinates in feels fittingly reminiscent of Phantom Blood's first half too. However, I think an element that makes this arc feel all the more impressive is once again how Araki has chosen to implement his stands. Which, while in part 3, the fantastical elements and locations within the story were complemented by equally outlandish and crazy stand powers, Diamond is Unbreakable decides to turn that application of stand ability execution on its head. While before in Stardust Crusaders, the bizarre was complemented by the amazing to create a cohesive uniformity that works so well for that story being told, in this one, Araki opts to strip away all of the fantastical elements of the world, but instead bathes it in the mundanity of everyday suburban life. And while the setting is standard and small scale, it allows the mad genius creativity of Araki through his use of stands to create an uneasy whiplash effect on its readers. In other words, the surroundings lull you into a state of relaxation and familiarity, not unlike a horror movie suddenly getting quiet before something amazing happens, which prime you for a visceral reaction when you eventually see those expectations blown out of the water when something creepy, awesome, mysterious, or all 3 of those things happen. It's a wonderful way of approaching a story, I think. But in order to help capture my experience going through this story for you, I'll run through the events in order and give you my thoughts. First up, Jotaro meets Josuke. Something I've noticed that's become something of a trend across all of these introduction chapters to the stories is that while endearing us to and educating us on the new protagonists of each arc, Jonathan, Joeseph, Jotaro, and now Josuke, is that typically in some form or expression they involve other characters we've already familiarized ourselves with. Which is honestly interesting because going into JoJo's Bizarre Adventure day one, before I even opened Phantom Blood, I thought it was incredibly unconventional to throw caution to the wind and change your protagonist at the beginning of every new arc. I thought this would not only alienate an audience, but it might even drive some away.
I don't even know who you are.
But whatever the case may be or circumstances in a given arc, you best believe there will always be some remnants of the prior story, or in the case of Diamond is Unbreakable, it has elements of past stories. Plural. That's right. Right off the bat, we're following the point of view of the prior protagonist, Kujo Jotaro, now searching for an individual in a small town in the middle of Japan called Morio. This story, Diamond is Unbreakable, is set in 1999, but was written by Araki in 1992. And really, it's not very noticeable apart from the fact that most people still have crazy 80s hair. And speaking of hair, let's talk about the new JoJo taking center stage. It's none other than the kind-hearted, short-tempered, and perfectly coiffed Josuke Higashikata. Now 16 years old, this young man is pursued by the 29-year-old Kujo Jotaro, who is, get this, Josuke's nephew. Let that sink in. It's explained to us that he's the child of Joseph Joestar during a night of passion with one Tomoko, despite him being married for decades and decades. Faithfully, I would have thought. But I guess not. Despite this decision being strange to me, and in that it really tears down Joeseph in my estimation retroactively, I think it also offered a lot of interesting opportunities later in the story for some emotional and intense moments, but I'll get to that later. During these first few chapters, Jotaro informs him that he's there to investigate strange goings on in the small town after Joseph's Hermit Purple, which is just the most useful plot device, shows an insidious presence looming over the area. And thus are the circumstances setting up this particular arc, and Josuke gets a nice introduction too, by saving a turtle from some bullies and beats them up and repairs them using his stand. This stand is called Crazy Diamond. It's super fast and can punch real good, but interestingly can heal and recombine what it has destroyed, leading to some of the most graphic images I've ever seen a protagonist from JoJo ever enact upon the cast of this story. Interestingly, I love that Diamond is Unbreakable takes care to align itself with the prior story in that Dio was the one to ignite the stand inside Josuke, as when he was 4 years old, we are told, much like Jotaro's mother Holly, he fell ill for quite some time. It's a nice little attention to detail, but it went a long way in making this feel more connected to the broader world. And this is where it gets good and gory. Right after Josuke and his little new friend leave after their chance encounter with Jotaro, they encounter this dude with a hostage. Josuke and Angelo. This was one of the coolest things I've ever seen, and the best part is the main character actually did that, and he healed him after. I can't imagine much would hurt more than that, but there you go. This fellow that got spit roasted by Josuke was actually under the control of a particularly small stand that can take over the body through water, and he is owned by one Angelo, a convicted criminal on death row that managed to escape by some means that are still unknown to us. This is the very first major adversary JoJo faces in this arc, and served the story exceptionally well in the wielder pretending to be different people throughout the town, enabling us the audience to get to know the various key characters like Tomoko, Josuke's mother, and his grandfather, Ryohei, who become the victims of this criminal's advances once he sets his eyes on Josuke and Jotaro after they interfered with his good time earlier. And sadly, his grandfather doesn't make it out of this particular chapter. Regarding Angelo, I thoroughly enjoyed his devious behavior and the action that ensued due to the absurd nature of his stand power, manifesting out of nowhere like from water bottles, steam, and even the rain. This guy would pop out of nowhere and cause all sorts of mayhem. However, not the sort of mayhem that Josuke and Jotaro couldn't take care of. Turned into a rock thanks to the inventive initiative of one Josuke's stand power, he eventually spills the beans on how he managed to escape prison and what would eventually become the goal early on when he describes the shadowy individual in a school uniform that granted him his stand power in the first place, by way of bow and arrow. This becomes incredibly interesting, and now we have an individual to be on the lookout for that's pretty much haunting this town. Great, so now we have a vague target and a goal, which on top of giving the audience something to shoot for, also clears up where all the other stand users from part 3 came from, other than thin air outside of the Joestar family line. The Nishimura Brothers. At this point in the story, I hope you're starting to appreciate that while this sort of feels episodic, the rate with which we receive new information that progresses the main story is much more frequent than Stardust Crusaders. And so, with Diamond is Unbreakable continuing the trend of edging closer to the truth, comes one of the coolest scenes in the first half for me. After investigating this decrepit building, they find themselves caught in a battle with these two individuals called the Nishimura Brothers. Things take a massively interesting turn for the mysterious and dramatic when out of nowhere, Josuke's new friend Koichi is almost killed by way of the arrow. And that's when we see this. This sent shivers down my spine, made to feel all the worse and more disconcerting due to how warm and familiar this suburban setting is. This bow and arrow grants those that are struck by it withstand powers, but it also comes at great risk. Those that are not strong enough to sustain the stand power, much like Holly, could run the risk of dying, and by the looks of it, Koichi isn't going to make it. He's not strong enough, but this is where Diamond is Unbreakable's strengths start to show themselves. Having seen Josuke attempt to restore his grandpa back to life after Angelo killed him, we know that in order to save Koichi, he needs to start the healing process before he fades away for good. And the only foes that seem to be standing in his way are the Nishimura Brothers. This added stake and stipulation to the battle really and truly makes for some edge-of-your-seat action. So far, the story has reeled me in, and what's more is it's made me care about these characters and impressed me with how they've structured these scenes. You know you're doing something right when as soon as Araki had Koichi struck by the arrow, my first reaction was, "Oh no!" But moments later, I was able to piece together that Josuke has the ability to save him. It's a wonderful feeling and it's carried out so well in this section. Josuke and the brothers do battle, but one of the brothers is saved by Josuke. The climax of this battle brings us to within a hair's breadth of retrieving the bow and arrow, thanks to in part the kind Nishimura brother Okuyatsu. He's not the brightest, but he appreciates Josuke's virtuous nature and joins him in his efforts. But shockingly, they are pulled away into a socket by way of some electrical stand user. He's made off with the bow and arrow, and Okuyatsu's brother is gone for good. Following this unsettling encounter, Josuke and Koichi, as a result of the conflict and actions taken therein, form a close friendship with Okuyatsu. And then something I never saw coming happened. The story ended. And it's around this point the show hits me with what it's trying to do, and let me tell you, it made me feel all the more tense. The following few groupings of chapters aren't very plot focused and instead lean heavily into the development of characters and or the exploration of the town of Morio in greater detail. This video is brought to you by Manscaped.com. Every now and then a sponsor lands on my desk that not only catches my interest but is also a perfect match for the video in question. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is filled with supermassive hairless dudes that no doubt have the best body care on the market. Enter Manscaped, who hooked me up with a bunch of tools and formulas for their all-in-one performance package kit. Nestled luxuriously beneath a canopy that boasts the phrase "your balls will thank you" were an assortment of devices and formulas carefully curated to take care of my unsightly body forest. First of all, I endeavored to take advantage of the new Lawnmower 3.0 waterproof trimmer with advanced skincare technology. That's a mouthful. I found that it was surprisingly easy to use, smooth, and easy on my skin, which has a tendency to be sensitive. After this, Manscaped saw fit to supply me with and bathe me in their sincerely named ball deodorant called Crop Preserver and a ball toner spray I really liked. The next weapon I was armed with was called the Weed Whacker Nose and Hair Trimmer. And let me tell you, Excalibur ain't got nothing on this thing. Super comfortable and very effective in use. For a limited time, you can get this plus 2 free gifts, the Shed Travel Bag and the Manscaped Anti-Chafing Boxer Briefs. Go to manscaped.com today and get 20% off plus free shipping plus 2 free gifts when you use the promo code TNM. So check out manscaped.com today. Your balls and your body will thank you. The Mini-Arcs. Koichi Hirose. The first of these minor sections covers a short 5-chapter adventure of Koichi as he... Yeah, he cycles over some kittens, which, by the way, now that I'm talking about it, this arc feels significantly more aged up than the first 3 did. There's some really scary stuff here later that shook me to my very core. This manga no longer feels like a shonen to me. Now, the point of this mini-arc is to define Koichi's character more clearly by pitting him up against a tame opponent with an interesting stand, but more so to develop and establish how Koichi's stand is developing. The prior encounter in the old house with the Nishimura brothers, Koichi acquired a stand, but as we saw, saw, it was an egg. However, in the fight that erupts forth from this section, his egg finally hatches and reveals Reverb, his stand, which has the really creative power of imprinting onomatopoeia onto the target and forcing that individual or object to hear or make that sound from that point onward. And the drawings in this section are awesome too. It's a really nice mini arc that helped me gain so much more respect for Koichi as a character.
Red Hot Chili Pepper.
This Red Hot Chili Pepper electricity enemy, while its wielder has been elusive and in the possession of the bow and arrow that has been our goal this entire time, despite being immensely slippery and powerful in his own right with some really spectacular action that left me on the edge of my seat throughout. Seriously, this battle and ultimately the person wielding this stand doesn't have much to do with the main story of this arc, but the action and fighting in this part was awesome, and that's something this arc has a lot of. But what I will say about Diamond is Unbreakable's beginning is that it is a very long and slow burner, but that's not to say it's bad. In fact, I loved it. This is some of my absolute favorite stuff from the series. Josuke's power to recombine and restore something is one of the most fun powers I've ever seen put to paper. The possibilities with it are seemingly endless, and the means with which it elevates fights is clear to see. But this meandering and almost aimless aspect of the story was something I wasn't expecting and really caught me off guard, and it certainly became an issue after this fight, seeing as we now have technically achieved our goal. We defeated the electricity dude and have the bow and arrow now. We won. The arc is over. Now, I'm gonna blitz through the next few so that I can talk about something that really excited me later in the story, but more so because it's not necessarily plot focused and more character driven. So if you want the character driven stuff, I can't really explain that to you. You just gotta watch it for yourself. And if you've seen it already, you don't need me to go over it. Toshikazu Hazamada, Yukako falls in love, Let's go eat some Italian food, Yokako Yamagishi dreams of Cinderella, and Let's go to the manga artist's house are all self-contained mini arcs that help us explore the wider community within the small town of Moria and their respective stand powers. They don't have anything to do with the plot directly, but oh boy, they will. And what's more is, now that I've read up to a certain point, I think I know exactly why Araki wanted to show us all of these people and their powers, so pay attention, it's very important. Toshikazu Hazamade's chapters tell the story of how Josuke and Koichi come into conflict with him. He's a regular student with a twisted side and an even spookier stand power, which can turn his marionette into a copy of whomever it touches. And what's more is, Toshikazu can also manipulate your own movements, and in the case of Josuke, tries to force him into stabbing his own eye. However, thanks to some quick thinking and some wonderfully convincing sound effects on behalf of Koichi and Reverb, Josuke tricks him into thinking he has stabbed his eye and eventually takes him out. Indirectly. In the end, Toshikazu repents for his sins and they ultimately forgive him. So, new party member, sort of. Yokako Yamagishi is the lucky recipient of 2 mini arcs that center around her and her antics. She's a tall, beautiful, dark-haired girl, and her introductory story involves her confessing to Koichi that she loves him. And this is where we really start to understand her as a character all the more. She is essentially obsessed with Koichi and following a rather cliche story in which Koichi becomes overwhelmed by her and eventually kidnapped. And the conflict arises as Koichi, he tries to escape. Her stand power is pretty cool too, where she can use her hair as appendages. In the ending conflict, Koichi chooses to save her despite his dire situation, which puts him up in my estimation all the more again. And she regrets what she did too, so...
I will not let you destroy my—
I'm sorry. I'm really sorry.
The second story she's involved with begins as she struggles with keeping her distance from Koichi, which she promised she would do after the last event. Once again, longing for him. What can I say? This is very clearly a female character written in the early 90s, though in this part we do get to see her engage with another female character that runs a boutique that can, using her stand, change and alter someone's face. This will become incredibly important later. Yakuko utilizes this to try and change her appearance to gain the favor of Koichi yet again. It sort of works, but not because she's super hot, but because she seems like a more relaxed person and he felt guilty about her feeling guilty. There's some creepy moments in here too, like her losing her face for a while. That happens. Overall, I like these 2 stories somewhat. They weren't super interesting, but they were fine and they served their job of introducing us to this character. And I like her. Let's Go Eat Some Italian Food is probably the most simple of all these small stories. Essentially, Okuyasu and Josuke go get some grub. The grub has some crazy side effects that are mostly positive for Okuyasu, Okuyasu, and Josuke is very suspicious. It's a really funny, enjoyable mini-arc that if you haven't seen it, I'd recommend. It's one of the funnier, more lighthearted aspects of the show and introduces us to this chef. And finally, in Let's Go to a Manga Artist's House, our newly acquired ally, Toshikazu, tag teams this one with Koichi once again, who's getting an enormous amount of shine as they decide to fanboy over this popular manga artist's house and where he lives in hopes to meeting him in real life. Within the world of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, he is an incredibly popular mangaka and he goes by the name of Rohan Kishibe, and he happens to live in their neighborhood too. He's a little creepy with a really cool design and even creepier power, which allows him to read people's life story like manga, and is even able to alter it to directly affect the person he targets, as you will soon see later. As you can see, with this particular mini arc, Araki's efforts are paying off. There's a considerable amount of time being spent away from Josuke, which makes him feel all the more important and impactful when he does eventually show back up in the story. We have all of these new characters all over the town now that we're familiar with, and we have so many different powers at our disposal. And this is also important because that electricity-based stand that reclaimed the bow and arrow we've been after all this time earlier, that isn't even remotely what this story is about. Congratulations, you've just graduated diapers in the world of Diamond is Unbreakable, because what happens after this is the real story, and it's easily my favorite part of this arc and any arc of any JoJo part I've ever seen. And it's not even close. The Serial Killer of Morio. This story isn't one that concerns itself with a quest or a series of battles necessarily. It's a murder mystery as we take a really interesting look into this town's dark, dark history. This part of the story literally freaked me out and achieved a sense of creepiness I haven't seen in a manga before, so let's dive right in. Rohan's Adventure. This is where things take a turn in this quiet town, from the mundane to the strange and eventually the unsettling. Introduced as just another harmless adventure with the likes of Koichi and our new ally Rohan, as the two stumble across an alleyway with this girl, they find themselves stuck in effectively a dimension between the living world and the dead. But that's not the interesting part. While it's horrific to see a dog's throat sliced so graphically, the unease comes from this girl called Remy, who reveals that she herself is a ghost and that she was brutally murdered by someone from Morio 15 years ago, and that he is still alive and killing to this very day.
What a twist!
I love that this story sprung this massive plot point out onto our laps out of effectively nowhere, all the while we were expecting just another slice of life chapter or episode. And this is not where this one ends either. Just barely succeeding to get out of this strange ghost dimension thanks to the quick thinking and nerves of Rohan, Josuke is brought up to speed on everything. However, since this serial killer in question isn't a confirmed stand user, he concludes that it's a job for the police, which is fair considering they've been looking for this looming evil over the town in the form of a stand user all of this time, so it stands to reason they want to remain focused. And that's when the manga does something I really wasn't prepared for. They immediately revealed the killer. Driving home from work, talking to someone in the passenger seat, makes small talk with his passenger before he attempts to help her out of the car seat. And that's when the camera pans out to reveal a severed hand. The way he talks to it, caresses it, and uses it for whatever reason really stayed with me and truly horrified me. But what I found interesting more than perhaps anything else was how Araki saw fit to structure this particular encounter. His viewers now know who the killer is, almost immediately after finding out that there was one, but no one else does. This turned out to be a spectacular decision for later on. Shigechis Harvest. Once again, we are greeted by another standalone 7-chapter story introducing us to a new member of the Morio community called Shigechi. Pretty much taking the focus in this section is the relationship and overall dynamic between the, at first seemingly sweet and innocent, Shigechi and the duo of Josuke and Okuyatsu. Short on money, once they learn of Shigechi's stand power Harvest and its unique abilities, they see an opportunity to leverage their ideas with his ability to get some quick cash. The plans go perfectly according to Josuke's plan, however, unable to see Josuke's utility and feeling like he did all the work, he didn't, Shigechi hoards all of the earnings for himself while throwing some change towards Jojo and his friend. This takes a turn for the worse when they suddenly realize that they've won a lottery ticket. Naturally, things escalate from here and climax in a stand battle with Josuke, Okuyatsu, and Shigechi. They fight in another terrifically unique battle with some terrifically clever implementations of Josuke's ability, which the longer this story goes on for, the more and more I fall in love with this particular ability and its utility within a story. The best way for him to take charge of this particular situation in dealing with this surprisingly powerful harvest stand was when he ripped up the winning lottery ticket target in front of everyone, making him suddenly the most important person and the only one who can bring the winnings back to reality. Shigechi learns a valuable lesson, and the three friends go on to the next day with their winnings and a newfound respect for one another. Yoshikage Kira wants to live a quiet life. Everything else from here on is nothing but suspense, horror, and action. And I think it should go without saying that it's my absolute favorite part of this arc so far. Kicking things off perfectly by once again making me totally grossed out by this Kira character as he punctures and purchases a sandwich with a severed hand under his coat. However, things take a turn for the surprisingly interesting and tense when Shigechi accidentally takes his bag containing the rotting severed hand of his most recent victim, and as a result, a direct DNA and fingerprint tie to Kira as the serial killer of Morio. Because of this, the episode now employs two great writing techniques, some of my favorites: Alfred Hitchcock's bomb under the table and dramatic irony. In the case of this scene, we know that the bag will eventually be placed into plenty of scenarios where Kira runs the risk of being discovered, and we are waiting for that moment, all the while occupying Kira's point of view and wondering what he might do if it is exposed. Secondly and finally, dramatic irony preys on the knowledge of the audience and the lack of awareness in the characters on screen. We know what's in the bag, but Shigechi, Josuke, and Okuyasu don't. It makes it all the more tense as we have no idea what Kira might do if they see it. Well, I mean, one could only assume, right? Okay, we're fighting, I guess. Kira's stand is called Killer Queen, and in my opinion is the perfect foil and complement to Josuke's Crazy Diamond. Where Josuke's heals and restores something to its original form, this Killer Queen specializes in turning everything it touches into bombs. And this is when one of the most depressing scenes in the first half lands. Staggering on the verge of death in a bloody heap through a hallway of his own school, people pass him by, ignoring him, not wanting to get involved, until he manages to pull himself up and touches the door handle to Josuke's classroom. This is what I was talking about earlier when I knew what Araki was doing within Morio. He wanted us to feel some sort of connection to these characters and for us to feel the loss when Kira ripped them away from the pages of this story. It's super effective, but there was a small miscalculation on Kira's part. One last gambit on behalf of Shigechi and Harvest, he stole a button from Kira's suit and delivered it straight to Josuke, unbeknownst to Kira. Exceptional use of the stand power. Not just because it's a neat idea to maintain this string of events, but because this is a small town, and with this lead, the gang have a good chance of encountering Kira when he goes to get his suit jacket repaired. And interestingly, in the next scene when they are pursuing Kira, the two characters we're following are Jotaro and Koichi in their very first team up as they investigate the origin of this button. And as luck would have it, his jacket is right there. Finally, a turn up for the books. They seem to be moments from cracking this case when... The brutality of this scene is phenomenal, and what's more is the killer is right here in this building, which means it's time for Killer Queen and Star Platinum to duke it out, I guess. This Kira character with his Killer Queen isn't simply a one-trick pony either, pulling out his brand new automated land drone that seeks out heat signatures and explodes on impact. The only time a character has performed in any meaningful way after their introductory arc has been Joeseph in Stardust Crusaders, but with Joeseph being so much older in that section and with it all containing a new power system taking hold, Joeseph felt significantly nerfed as a result. However, in this battle sequence with Heart Attack, Jotaro feels just as powerful as he ever has, utilizing everything he's come to be known for: a cool head, clever tactics, leadership qualities, and brute force. Something I think is important to expand upon at this point is that, unlike Joeseph not using Hamon much in Stardust Crusaders and as a result feeling useless by comparison, Jotaro very much feels powerful and capable, even someone all the characters in this park can look up to. And for Heart Attack, a part of Kira's stand power to give him that much trouble was shocking and believable considering Jotaro's power set. Left in a bloodied heap on the floor, clinging to consciousness, Jotaro's life is in Koichi's hands. However, understandably at this point, I'm thinking to myself, how could Koichi do what Jotaro couldn't? Well, the answer is he can't. But what he can do is utilize information we know about the heart attack drone already and leverage that through clever tactics to buy time and call for backup, specifically to call Josuke. Honestly, I think Koichi's stand is one of my favorites out of all of the ones I've come across so far in the series. He managed to find a weakness that Jotaro couldn't exploit. And that's not all. Following the trend that's been established throughout this arc so far, Reverb further matures and digivolves into Act 3. With a whole new set of powers, a brand new look, he acts as another mystery box for both us as an audience and Koichi to hope and pray he has some sort of new power that can be useful against this indestructible heart attack. And he does! This little guy has the single most useful move ever! The best part is, it directly affects Kira's character. Someone that always wants to keep a low profile now has his hand crushed through a table and has everyone now looking for him. Thanks to this incredible new technique, Kira is forced to return to the battlefield along with Killer Queen to finish what he started in person. With all of this being put onto Koichi's shoulders, all the while juggling the abilities of a new stand he's still coming to grips with, was such a tense time. However, he managed to do what no one else was able to do, expose Kira. Enraged by this, he flattens Koichi and moves on to the killing blow. I jumped out of my chair when I saw this. I thought Koichi was so gonna die. We are not out of the woods yet, not by a long shot. Jotaro is on the verge of collapse and Kira can sense and feel that in his blows. Thankfully, however, Jotaro can, unbeknownst to Kira, stop time and attack then. And attack he does! Landing blow after blow after blow, Jotaro knocks out Kira before falling to the floor himself unconscious. And as luck would have it, this is when Josuke stumbles into the equation. Time to heal the party, and oh my god, are you seriously gonna heal this guy? This moment when Josuke came so damn close to healing Kira had my stomach in knots. And thankfully, Josuke isn't a dumb character and actually logics his way out of this one in a really impressive way. Kira has screwed up in this instance, but by using his heart attack drone once again, he manages to just about escape. And this is where, once again, Araki impresses me beyond all measure with his utter stupid genius. Josuke once again showing us the tremendous utility of his stand. Instead of fighting the drone, he heals it, which forces it to fly back towards Kira, thus outing his whereabouts once again, allowing the crew to find where he is. And now all they gotta do is follow this drone and... Oh, jokes aside, I've said genius a lot, but this was seriously genius. He now has a new face thanks to this woman that we've already been introduced to. He's killed this woman, and now he's missing after assuming a new identity. My favorite part about this conclusion is that this is Araki making full use of his medium and the JoJo property. When it was revealed that there was a killer on the loose, and then immediately later Kira was revealed to us, I genuinely was both confused and impressed. Typically speaking, the fun of a whodunit story comes from speculating as to the whereabouts and the identity of the killer, but he decided to reveal him right up front, and with that, a host of new possibilities were explored and enjoyed by us. Namely, a number of tense encounters from the killer's point of view, but thanks to the stand of one user, thanks to the way JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is written, Araki can now enjoy his cake and eat it too. He can now have had that story that he explored with Kira just now, and he can now have a whodunit story with the killer on the loose without us having a clue as to what he looks like. And honestly, that blew me away. Next week, the finale of this arc is going to be truly